Hello and welcome back to RageGamingVideos and a new Shadow of Erdtree video. We're back for a new tier list with the new patch of 0.13, which has changed quite a lot. Today though, we're focusing on the DLC weapons because that original list, there was quite a few options that just weren't that good we could really poke at, to the point where, you know, a lot of them weren't even that great. These days, it's changed a lot. And honestly, everything we're going to talk about today should be considered a good weapon. That's a really exciting thing. As a disclaimer though, this is for PvE only as usual. It's our top 15 choices of the DLC new weapon specifically, and it's compared to one another. But as you can see, we do have some S+ options all the way down to C tier. So let's get started working from the bottom. With one that is a new addition to the list, it's the Horned Warrior's Greatsword, which is actually a curved greatsword, which is, you know, fine as a weapon, but definitely not worthy of even being on this list. It's the unique weapon skill and the buff that it had in this patch, bringing it into focus just barely. That is Horn Calling Storm, which essentially has you do this multi-hit combo with a kind of storm caller effect around it, and previously it didn't really have the poise protection to really get it off, or the power even to make it worth it. The range of it was pretty decent though for a storm attack, and now in this patch they've increased the attack power. The result is actually really good damage potential, especially with successive build-up, but the fact that there's still no poise protection means you can't trade without being interrupted generally, and as it is a longer combo, it does mean it's hard to get the full thing off, but it certainly is possible. The damage is very respectable at this point, but its potential is limited by how awkward and unreliable it is to get the full thing off. Maybe in a future patch we'll actually see some poise protection, and this will become quite relevant. Until then, we think C tier is at least worthy of a mention. But that's actually the only C tier pick as we go into B tier with the classics Sword of Light and Sword of Darkness, which used to be C tier, but honestly, we think they're contextually very underrated for the value they bring. Sure, in their Ashes of War with the actual buffing of holy damage and the debuff to make holy damage deal more to a target, but the weapons themselves are fine for being the holy damage source. They are unchanged in the patch is the thing, but let's say the holy body buff of the Sword of Light. This is going to increase the amount of holy damage you deal with any holy based follow-up. It's a body buff so you can completely unequip the weapon. There's no real downside to it if you've got the stats to use it. In one of the best builds we're going to talk about today, we're going to be using that body buff before a fight, and in any holy build you really should. It's harder to argue for the Sword of Darkness, to be fair, since you actually have to use it in the fight, apply it. It's a slow animation without the protection, but the range of it's good, and the damage is not bad either. And again, using the two straight swords as your primary source of damage isn't actually that bad. They could be insane if we saw some improvements to their scaling, and there's still hope for that, but with the self buffs and the debuffs on the target, the damage is good. It's just a bit of a slow combo with the dual straight swords. They are on the cusp though of greatness. Also very good still is the Messmer Soldier Spear, which we used to have in A, but we contextually put it down to B, just because it's so one-note. There isn't really anything changed about it in the patch, and the reason that it's relevant and a good weapon to consider is just the strength and power behind the heavy attacks. It allows you to do this long-range, multi-hit combo poke, which is great for building up stagger and deals solid damage in itself. That is pretty much what you're going to be trying to do the whole time you use this weapon, and if we were to compare just spamming charge attacks to something like, you know, fist weapons, the ones that have super quick hits and are going to build those staggers so much faster, that's a downside, but the range and power behind these hits at least deserves an acknowledgement, and we feel it's a bit more correct to put it in B tier. Also in B tier still then is the Ancient Meteoric Ore Blade, which is still awkward as a strength arcane mix, but it's undeniable that it's a colossal sword that hits hard, builds up stagger really well, and the unique weapon skill has you thrust and dash forward, which is an incredibly useful gap closer and punish option. And then obviously it has the explosion follow-up, which does okay damage. Nothing about this is standout per se, it's just very reliable, very easy to use, and is a fun, cool design as a colossal sword. The thrusting style is obviously pretty damn incredible. It still deserves the acknowledgement for being a consistent, good option. But that brings us to A tier, where we have the most weapons here, especially after the new patch, where say the Great Katana Rakshasas has been improved. Specifically, its unique weapon skill Weed Cutter has got this buff where it's got increased speed of attack. This is a really big buff for it because pretty much the only reason you're using this weapon is to use that weapon skill, allowing you to do these horizontal strikes back to back for, you know, relatively cheap FP cost. You're going to run out of stamina first, to be honest. This playstyle kind of requires you to trade with foes though, because you want the successive hits. You never want to break the combo as long as you can. With the improved pace, that's better for successive hits, and it is noticeably stronger because of it. We feel this is actually a significant buff, but no matter what way you look at this, it's still incredibly dangerous to do that, to trade against many enemies, especially in the DLC, and certainly higher levels of New Game Plus. which is always going to kind of limit its potential because you have to trade. Still, it is in a very good place now and well worth considering. Much like another new addition to the list, which is the Red Bear's Claws. This one was improved for its weapon skill Red Bear Hunt, which is basically a triple hit combo. Now it's going to hit harder with better potential to stagger alongside the base bleed buildup, which was strong in itself. Specifically, they increased its attack power and increased poise value when using this skill. So you're kind of able to spam this weapon skill as much as possible during a fight. The damage is much more relevant, and hey, you've got stagger potential to interrupt it to go for more the combo or maybe a critical. The successive buildup being more consistent is going to lead to more AR. Having more control over the fight is actually a significant thing. I don't think these really compare to your normal fist weapons like Starfist, just because of the ridiculous stagger and control you get from them, as well as the damage, but it's a lot more competitive, and certainly in the DLC options, a serious contender. This has been kind of the buff that it was looking for. So we're very happy with it, and yeah, I recommend it. Now lastly, for A tier in terms of things that have actually changed, you have Milady, which as a light greatsword has kind of been hit by the general light greatsword buff. What they did is they increased the damage animation of the light greatsword charge attacks against enemies. So that means your charge attacks, your heavies, they're stronger. That is nice, undeniably, but I don't think it's that relevant for why you're using something like Milady, because the best way to run it generally is wing stance, which you're using for the wing stance heavy attack, which is kind of a leaping thrust, which, you know, has potential to be piercing damage, counterattack damage, or a stagger because it's got great stagger buildup, comparable to things like Unsheath or Square Off, and the weapon itself is solid for the damage it has, the reach, and the fun playstyle of light greatswords in general. I do feel that their basics could deal with, you know, more poise or more damage behind them. This is a step in the right direction to increase the damage of charge attacks, but something about those combos I'd like to see pushed a little bit further. Still, it was A tier before, it's A tier now. Right, we have 3 more weapons to talk about in A tier, and all of them are unchanged, so we'll be pretty quick. Starting with the Death Knight's Longhaft Axe. This is a mix of physical and lightning, which I just think, since the DLC, is an incredibly strong combo. Reminding me of the Crescent Axe, it has a very quick 4-hit light attack combo, the solid horizontal charged heavies, and what this is all about really, the unique weapon skill Blink Bolt, but for this axe in particular, that has you dash with iframes, turning yourself into lightning, then you leap up and slam down for a nice hit and more lightning follow-up. It's not necessarily the most busted, insane damage on the board, but the fact that it's a heavier hitting weapon that has iframes, that's pretty insane for its weapon skill. Also, that can be used as a gap closer, meaning you could avoid an attack by going in or dodging away. The utility and benefit of that can't be understated, and technically you could just spam this weapon skill over and over, using it to evade and attack all at the same time, which is just really strong. Very comparable then to the Fire Knight's Greatsword, a classic colossal sword, with say the Godslayer's moveset that's more vertical for a colossal sword, feeling a bit quicker and easier to use generally in my opinion. I really like this one for the raw power of it, the stagger behind it, the range, but combined with the Fire Knight's unique Ashes of War, that enhances it even more. The ones that are going to buff it up with fire damage to enhance its physical fire combo even more, like Flame Spear, which has you thrust for incredible range, poking at the target and maybe staggering it, opening up new windows of opportunity for punish, dealing solid damage behind that hit. Nothing about this is absolutely busted, like super high DPS or anything. It's just incredibly reliable and strong and heavy hitting all the same. I find it so easy to use in any scenario really, and still rate it very high because of it. Less so the case, but still very strong and respectable, the last weapon in A tier is the Sword of Night Katana. This has that kind of serpent blade katana option, where when you use the charged heavies, it does this multiple swing hit. That's great for successive build-up, which is what this is all about. Its unique weapon skill has you charge an attack and then do a triple combo hit. The first 2 parts pretty quick, then there's a delay, and then a big hit at the end. Technically, you can tap this rather than full charge it to get it out quicker, and you may end up doing that. But obviously, you're looking to do the full charge whenever you can. It has a bit of a lunge effect behind it, allowing you to gap close or step in, giving you better opportunities to get the full thing off, because there isn't exactly a lot of poise protection here. So it is hard to get off, but with the right timing and a confident player, you can. So the potential is there, but I think it's a higher skill one out of the rest. And I suppose I'd put it at the bottom of A tier of these options because of that. And yeah, it wasn't really changed in the patch, so not much more to say. Let's move up a tier then to S tier, where we do have some changes, starting with a Claws of Night, which I still put in S tier. They had this weird description of what they've done, so let me read it out. Fixed a bug where the physical attack attribute of the scatter shot throw skill, that's the weapon skill, was different than expected. Now, based on our testing, because that's very vague, comparing the numbers from before and after the patch, this seems to mean the long range attack of the weapon skill is reduced. But since you're ideally using this shotgun range blast either way, and that damage seems to be very similar or even the same, we still rate it very high. Ultimately, they're good claws for just using the standing light attack combo and successive hits for damage and bleed, but then you have the opportunity to use the weapon skill for ranged punish. This can be done at medium to long range to help maintain bleed status, or just free poke, but ideally you do it at shotgun range anyway to make sure all of those throwing hits actually land. Still building up great successive hits and bleed, so we still really like it. Though I don't really like vague notes like that, would love to know actual numbers. Next in S tier then we have the backhand blades, which are still here despite some changes we have since. Since we're only really focusing on PvE, it's not a massive nerf per se. What they've done is they've not really worried about blind spot, which is the PvE option in my opinion, that has you dash to the side and then, you know, thrust poke. That could be counterattack damage. It has iframes. It's a very reliable way to never really have to roll and just use that to dodge instead and then continue to successive hit the target. Comparatively, the other great option was swift slash, which has reduced movement distance and longer recovery time. It's not what it once was, but that was the more popular one in PvP, where I'd rather use blind spot in PvE anyway, and since that's just as good, I don't think this should go down or anything like that. They're still great weapons, and I still absolutely love blind spot for PvE purposes. Last in S tier then we have the falx, which has had a slight change, and it's a better one. Its unique weapon skill Revenger's Blade has been buffed to give it increased directional control for follow-up attacks after the strong attack. Basically this means you've got these massive successive hits and you have a bit more control now. They're still great, they're still hitting harder, and now it's just easier to use. There isn't necessarily more damage or say poise protection during this, you still need to time it, but the DPS potential there is still the same as what it was, if not easier to use. As curved swords, they're never really going to compete with things like bandits curved and scavengers with seppuku, since you can't apply the same weapon buff like that, but it's still very good, and in terms of DLC weapons, a top contender all the same. But that finally brings us to S+, where we have two weapons. One of them is Euphoria. I just made a build all about this weapon, and I do think it's a contender for one of the best weapons in the game overall now, which is amazing. What they did in the patch is decrease the number of attacks required to restore the weapon's luster. That's that holy buff. You need to build up that holy buff by attacking, and then you'd unleash the weapon skill when it's ready. That holy buff, the luster, that has increased duration now. It lasts over half a minute, compared to what felt like 5 seconds impossible to use. That is so much better. Then the actual weapon skill itself, that's all this holy damage, they just increase the damage of that when the weapon has its luster restored. So it's much more reliable to use. You build up the buff so much quicker. You have longer to actually decide when to use the weapon skill when the right time calls for it, and then that weapon skill hits harder. So across the board, this is everything it needed, and it's pushed it from kind of a high potential but super hard to use weapon to, yeah, one of the best, certainly in the DLC. It deals comical damage, it's incredibly easy to use, building up the successive hits is really quick with a twin blade anyway. I absolutely love it, and it's probably going to be one of the most popular, if not the most popular DLC weapon, at least for a little while after this patch. But the last weapon I need to talk about for the list is of course Bloodfiend's Arm, which was amazingly untouched in this patch. So you're dealing incredibly hard hitting hits, building up shocking amount of bleed, and staggering targets super easy by relying on just charged heavies, and maybe a jump attack heavy here and there. It's the same as it was, very one note, but still super effective, whether you're using Endure to ignore whatever the target's doing, or maybe Royal Knight's Resolve to make sure those hits hit even harder. In the past, it was reduced in terms of status build-up, but we never thought that really mattered anyway. It's still super strong. But yeah, there you have it. That is our tier list for the new DLC weapons and how things have changed in the patch. Hopefully you can understand our reasoning on them and maybe give some of the new stuff a try. We've got a lot to cover with the patch itself and all kinds of builds and stuff, so we're going to be continuing that. But if this was useful or interesting, please do let us know with a like. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.